is about being on your limits almost right from the start on.
If you're too close to the limit, most of the times that's when you crash.
The Lux is like one of the bikes which goes like into the deepest depth of our DNA in mountain biking. Over world champion titles to several titles we had together with Matthew or Pauline. For sure the cherry on top of the whip, having the world champion title with Jenny together speaks for itself.
Let's say 10 years ago, you could almost say before the race who is going to win. I think today it's harder to tell because of the tight racing.
I would say nowadays the field is especially stronger because the density is so much better.
There's more and more risks coming out, there's more and more dangerous maneuvers, there's more chaos happening. But yeah, it's definitely intense, but it's sick.
I think a lot was said at the beginning of the project when we get the brief, but really the one thing that stood out to me was to design the fastest bike for modern World Cup tracks. As the sport's developed and the courses have developed, the riders have also been developing to this new generation of bikes.
A good XC race bike has to be good in the climbs and also good in the downhills without compromising on anything.
Already on the day we got that old bike for the very first time back in 2022, we started to think about what's going to be the next step.
I think with the previous bike we had an amazing platform to start with. It's very lightweight, but maybe somewhat with an old school geometry and kinematic. First thing with the project, we wanted to determine the kinematic overall philosophy, so we created a kinematic Frankenstein. This was one frame where we could change simply the shock and the linkages out, go away on one setup, they don't know what they're trying, and then they can come back, we'll change the setup and compare it between the two.
After 1-2 years we got the very first prototypes to test on with different geometries. I must say at this point I couldn't really imagine how good the final product gonna be because there were still lots of things to work on.
The feedback from our pro teams is invaluable because no one is creating those race conditions and pushing the product to that level as they are.
This is their daily bread and butter, like being on this bike.
I felt like with the old bike in the downhills you are a bit limited because you have to get the lines very well to make it fast. Bike is more doing what it wants and not really
you are not
what you...
controlling like 100%, yeah, it's true. So, but this one seems to be really way better.
Compared to the previous bike, I'd say the biggest changes are actually geometry-wise, where the head angle is slackened out by 2.5 degrees. We've also created slightly longer chainstays and they adjust with the length of the bike as well. So the smaller sizes have shorter chainstays and then the large and extra large have a larger rear triangle.
It's just a matter of recovering on downhills, you know, and I think with the new bike, it's going to be much more capable of being at that speed while having the comfort of being able to recover a bit more and also it being more consistent, you know, like in the second half of a race once you're fully cross-eyed, and that's where that setup and that new geometry is going to help you sort of just mediate those risks.
My main expression is that or you play with the bike or the bike plays with you. If I want to go right, I go right. If I want to jump, I jump, and feel that one with the bike will be a big improvement. If the bike helps you a little bit, the limit will go a bit farther.
It's getting to the point now, modern day cross country, where you need all the travel.
On the rear of the bike we now have 110 millimeters of travel. Up front we've got 120.
My limit with the old Lux was that I had to absorb the big impacts. For example, going straight on a rocky downhill, I was doing like this. With the new Lux, the bike is doing most of the job, so I can go faster and at the same time I would not feel like I'm going on the limit.
Looking out on the trails and, you know, just the steep technical stuff when out riding, I just feel young again. It's awesome.
And overall, it's a bike now that people are able to relax into, to descend, needing less effort and less active riding.
We use telemetry a lot the last month. I think it was one of the big changes the last cross-country season. It's available because we can get a lot of information in dates about how the suspension works.
On the rear suspension was that the riders before were noting they wanted a bit more suppleness, so to increase the small bump sensitivity, and by decreasing the progression we have at the ride height, we were able to achieve this and make sure the riders can maintain as much traction as possible, both for climbing and descending, of course. With creating a bike that's more sensitive to small bumps and creating more traction, we wanted to balance this out by really paying a lot of attention to the anti-squat levels on the bike. And to address this, we've come up with an anti-squat flip chip. By using this, the rider can choose the exact level of anti-squat they want, whether it be a high or a low setting, simply by swapping over the two inserts we have on the main pivot of the bike.
It gives you the opportunity to individualize the bike. You can adapt to certain courses and preferences and riding styles.
So we have the high anti-squat position, which creates the most efficient bike as possible on the climbs. And then also we have the low anti-squat position, where you regain a little bit of sensitivity on the descents and have less feedback coming through the pedals again. With all these changes to kinematics, geometry and adjustability, we've still managed to come away with a frame weight that's 80 grams lighter than our previous frame.
In the end, physics is something you can't ignore. When you go from the bottom to the top, you somehow have to get up all the weight.
And a full frame weight of 1,470 grams. So areas like the bottom bracket, we've gone with press fit to keep things as stiff and also as lightweight as possible. Coming around the back of the bike, we've got a new brake mount here, an interface where you can choose between 180 and 160 mil rotors, and also keeping things as lightweight and as optimized as possible.
Cape Epic is a mental race.
It's going to require a lot for the Cape Epic. It's going to push us both to our level.
This day gonna be one of the hardest ever, I think.
But I think the philosophy is the same. Monkey pedal bike fast as possible.
Let's welcome Team Canyon, Lucas Schwarzbauer, Sam Days.
Never again. I will do this never again. What the
The conditions, 5.5 hour running.
That was the hardest day of my life.
Not.
Yeah, I mean, that was a horrible day. That was probably the most I've ever suffered.
seconds to become the men's born in Africa. And now, Rome, 69 winners of every single day.
That last climb was, especially the last portion of it, was just like a wall, and you're on the limit, and like you want to let go a little bit just to make sure that you can like not go in like over the red zone.
And the chords that pumps, the celebration has begun.